they all basically have the exact same concept. It just depends on which one. All of these trees, for Raleigh, for example, has a 5-year warranty on it. It's a good tree. The Tucker trees have 10-year warranties on them. Basically, most any tree that's made in the United States has somewhere in that 5 to 10-year warranty, okay, on that. What you would do with this is another little deal. This is a little bridge pad, okay? So let's say that your horse has a big gap right in here, okay? So when you have the gap, what you would do is, to feel this, you either have your saddle on. So I'm doing trees, but we're going to pretend this is a saddle. If I would put my hand up under here, and for example, I could move my fingers and so forth, and the saddle actually didn't really move any, then you probably have an issue there. You've got some kind of big gap. If I rub my hand like you can see on here, then you see when I move this, the tree moves. So basically we've got contact, because if we didn't have contact, it wouldn't raise up. But if we had a gap in here, from here to here, okay, what we would do is look at one of these. I'm going to show you another fit pad, and we would determine where we need to put this based on the horse's back, if it needs to be back further, forward, and we would sit this in there, and then of course we would then put this on top of our existing saddle pad. What that would do then is fill the bridge issue that we would have here, and then this is closed cell memory foam, so actually when you cinch your saddle down, this is going to basically nest into this, and so this would fill any of those little voids. These come in 2 different shapes, 2 different widths, thicknesses, 3/4 and 1 inch. Okay, so it depends on what your issue, how thick your issue, or the depth of your issue would be. And so this is one way that you could fix any of those saddle type issues that you have. The other thing that you could do is you could buy a pad that's already got little shims in it over here, and then we would put this on. The beauty of this type of pad is it has all these little shims. But let's say you have one horse that you need somehow to use shims to get your saddle to fit correctly, but then you have another horse that really got a pretty good back, conformation's pretty good. You can pull all these out and just use the pad like it is, and you only have one saddle pad, so you don't have to end up with multiple pads. Again, if we had a bridge issue here, almost it could be from sway back or just a regular bridge, we would pull these out, we would leave these 2 in, and then this would fix our situation that way. We do the same thing on the opposite side if it looks exactly the same. If we had a saddle that we were looking at, we had a horse, for example, that was a little bit downhill to a lot downhill, so actually, you look from a distance at your horse, and your saddle looks like this, okay? Then it's like, okay, well, what do I need to do here? Well, you've got to build the front of your saddle up. There isn't going to be a tree, there isn't going to be a saddle that's going to correct this angle, okay, from a horse. So you have to use the padding to correct this. So what we would do there is then we would come up to the front, we would put the shims up here, we would pull shims out here. Again, this is trial and error, so you might have to use 2, you might need 1, so you have to always tweak these things a little bit. It's not like one fix up every single horse. But what we do is we pull these out, and then we would have the saddle would be raised up in the front, and sort of balance this horse's back out. So we would sort of come to wherever, if we needed another one, and then it would rise, we'd put one more to make contact. But basically, when you're looking at your saddle, you always want to see that from the line here, that your saddle is basically relatively level on your horse's back. It shouldn't be up like this looking, as well as it shouldn't be looking that way. Either one of those is not the way the trees were designed to fit on your horse's back. So you always want to evaluate your horse's back before you put the saddle on. You want to look from behind here, look down, see what you see as far as shoulders, gaps, whatever, any little issue that you see that looks larger than what the thickness of your saddle pad is, because your saddle pad is going to fill all those voids. The saddle pad is basically does 2 things, absorbs energy and perspiration. The other thing it does is fill voids, so it's like a gasket. So you have little gaps, it molds all in that, so your horse's conformation isn't exactly perfect, which most horses aren't. And so the trees are built on averages. They're not built for each individual horse. So that's what your saddle pad is going to do. It's going to fill those little voids and correct all that. Then if you've got something that's a little more severe, then that's when you have to use shims, wedges, whatever, okay, to correct those. Again, what's good about this pad, let's say that you have a horse that big shoulder, little shoulder, okay? So you notice that from this way. So you're back here and you're sort of looking, and your saddle sort of seems to cock to the side when you ride or something like this. And you keep wondering, once you get started, you can straighten it up, and then it comes back, and you sort of wonder, and then you start looking, and you say, gosh, I see this deal. What's good about this is you could then come here, you can fill the void over here, okay? So wherever that may happen to be, it could be the whole side. This whole side of the horse may be a little leaner, and so you may need to build this side off, leave this like it is. Now that balances you back up again, get your saddle back on your horse, you're gonna set straight, from that point, so then you corrected an issue there. So these pads are very good to do a lot of different little things to help you in the fitting world. The little bridge that I had earlier isn't a easy fix that we showed. You can actually Velcro that onto your existing saddle pad. You mark the area that it needs to be, then you can just get some of the Velcro with the stick, the glue back, stick it on there, then it's all one pad, so then you don't have to, every time you go to saddle, you don't have to try to fit this on here, make sure it's at the same point. And it won't necessarily, the issue that I have with them, if you just leave them on there or you put them underneath, is they have a tendency to work themselves out. So if you do a lot of sort of hill, riding and so forth, this thing begins to move, and then 2 hours later it's back here. And of course now you've got a worse issue and you don't really know about it. Now you've got to get off and try to fix everything, and just resaddle and go from there. So that would be the reason I would use the Velcro on that. There's another saddle pad that's out that is a called, the name of it is a sway back pad. And what it does is, it's for a horse that has a much deeper drop here, okay? Again, this doesn't have to necessarily be an older horse. I've seen horses that have sort of a drop, okay, in the top line, 7, 8 years old, that just by looking at the horse from a distance, you'd have thought the horse was, a 25-year-old horse. But it just, the genetics of that particular breed sort of have this issue, okay? And so what the pad does is it starts off here at 3/4 of an inch, and then it slowly on each end gets thicker to where it's 1 1/4 inch all through the center part, so it fills the whole void. So then all you have to do is put one saddle pad on, and then put your saddle on and ride, and it fills everything up like that. So that's another easy way to fix, okay? I get a lot of questions about, well, I want my horse to have the best saddle, saddle. I don't want to put any pads, I don't want any shims, I don't want this. Well, the problem is, it's almost impossible, okay? Unless you have a very, very well-built horse, and you have a certain saddle tree manufacturer that actually is going to fit your horse. They're all made on averages. There's not going to be a tree for every horse. There's only basically about 10 tree manufacturers in the United States who make trees, and there's not this big variety of trees. There's not like, they have, like, for example, in pant sizes, there's not from 0 to 24. Okay, they don't have that many. I mean, basically you have a very limited in widths. So basically what you have is either or, semi-quarter horse, regular or medium. Those are the same. You either have full quarter horse or wide. Those are the same. Then you have extra wide, okay? Then you have Arab trees that some of the people manufacture, which typically are a little shorter, okay, which can get to different quarter horses, crosses. A lot of that's experimentation, because you have to look at the horse's conformation, the back, and then make a decision on, okay, I think that particular saddle, that tree might work on this horse, and we'd put it on, and then we'd sort of do a little mini test and see how we think it works. So you don't have, like I said, this big variety of multiple trees, okay? In the Tucker world, they offer 2 more trees, which are FB wide and FB medium. And what that stands for is flat back, which is basically for really lean gator horses, okay? So the gator breeds that are really lean, slab backed and so forth, that's what those 2 trees are for. So they've added that. They actually had that originally when they began to make their saddles, their trees to fit overall horses, and they sort of incorporated that. They went back and put the FB trees in because they were designed basically just for the small gated horses on that. So as you go, there's not this big variety. You have some companies who offer a draft, which for most people, an extra wide and a draft are very similar, okay? So you can't go out there and say, well, I got to have this perfect fit. I have to have this right when I put it on without changing anything other than a normal pad. You basically, to some degree, either going to use a half inch pad, a 3/4 inch pad, an inch pad, and in some cases an inch and an 1/8 pad, okay, which they make. So those are basically your one-piece pads as far as thicknesses. And as a rule, if you've got a horse, let's say you have 2 horses, maybe 3, But you have one horse that's really wide, and your other two horses are a little slimmer and so forth. And you're like, a lot of us, it's like I need, you know, I can't ride all of them at the same time, but I don't want to have 3 saddles, you know. Basically, you'd want to try to fit your biggest horse, widest horse, and then tweak the saddle to your other 2 horses, okay? That would be if you only wanted to have 1 saddle. Now, obviously, you can buy a saddle for each horse, but that would be, if that's your issue, you're always going to have to fit your biggest horse and then tweak it to the other horses. That can also be accomplished by rigging positions, and I'll show you a 3-way rigging position on the saddle, actually 3-way rigging itself, and then show you the different positions in it. But that is going to be like this here. We're going to go ahead and pull the tree off. And our saddle here, with the little flap, and you see this looks like a bee stuck on the side of the skirt. And so the reason it's called a 3-way is you have 3/4 rigging position, which is the back. Then we would crisscross this, which I'll show you. So you go from your ring to your girth, back to your other side, and then this creates a V, and then that's your 7/8 rigging position. Then if you want your full position, you rig it all the way to the front. Full, of course, is the widest. 7/8 is average, and of course 3/4, if you were going to call it that, sort of the narrow term, okay, of the 3. So if you have a little narrow horse, you'd move it back there. A lot of people do that on this particular model saddle, again, with gated horses, or really slope-shouldered, slab-sided horses, like that. So that gives you an option between saddle pad and rigging position, gives you a couple options that you can sort of tweak and fit. Now, whatever you do, if you have a saddle like this that has this position, these 3 positions available, you would need to do it on both sides. Whatever one side is, the other side has to be exactly the same. It can't be 2 different sides. What happens then is your saddle torques to one way or the other, and so now you're driving the tree and the pressure into one side, and your horse ends up moving this way. Well, after a period of time, you end up with the horse with several issues as time goes on. And then you're sort of wondering what's going on, and it's sort of hard to figure out because everything seems to fit fine when you first put it on. Once you cinch it and you start riding, the saddle your tree begins to twist on it. And so that's the reason you want both of these rigging positions to be the same. The biggest thing that I run into when I talk to people, or people ask me or tell me about their horses, the number one is they think that their saddle is too narrow, and typically it's really too wide. And the reason for that is the saddle sits very far down, and it is very tight, but it's only tight at the very top part of your skirt and your bar. And so what's happening is as you cinch it, it's drawing down and down and down, and so all the contact becomes only at the very top part. You want the contact as evenly as possible across the whole width of the bar if you can, but not on the top and not only on the bottom, okay, when you're fitting. You want it to be more centered, okay? And so what happens, the saddle gets drawn down, and so people, they look at it, they can't get their hands in here. The very top, it's very tight and it's drawn down. But if you go to the bottom, you come up under the skirt, you have no contact. So what you want to do is run your hand from the bottom up this way, and then sort of see is where because the tree basically is coming like this. So when my hand gets here, is this got some contact to it, or I can just slide my finger all the way up to this concho before it actually gets snug? That basically is telling you that you're only got contact at the top, and you need to either get a little thicker saddle pad, which would be my suggestion, put that on, and then see exactly what it feels like from that point. Again, you could do a saddle pad that has shims on it. You could just shim the front of it. There's also a pad that has even big shims that are built into it that's available. You can try that. Or you can even take an older pad that you have, cut it out, attach, get your strap sewn across it, and then have 2 squares across here. They don't have to be long, because as you can see, you can only see the distance of your bar from your swell. And you're only talking basically this width. It's not a gigantic amount of width there. This is all your skirt through here, so this actually isn't doing anything to help your weight distribution, okay, on your horse. It's to sort of wrap around your horse and sort of help the saddle fit to the horse. So it sort of hugs to the horse's body is what it does, like that. I went over, I think, the tree widths earlier, and what they've done. One of the reasons there was a change when I was talking about medium, wide, and so forth is, over the period of a long time, originally the Western saddle trees were basically, as a rule, designed to fit quarter horses. Over many, many years, there's been a lot of crossbreeding between quarter horses, gaited horses, Hanoverians, you name it, gaited, I mean, it's a mix. And so the actual conformation of the horses weren't designed as they originally, the trees were designed. So over time, they've been tweaking these trees a little bit based on all the changes that are out there. But what happens is, someone comes in who's sort of new, doesn't know a lot about saddle fitting, doesn't know very much about saddles in general, the trees, what they are, brings a horse in. So let's say they bring a thoroughbred horse. They're riding Western, and somebody's looking at it and they're trying to help them fit the horse. And they said, oh, I think that the way that horse is built, we ought to try that semi-quarter horse tree on. Well, the person says, oh, whoa, I don't want a quarter horse tree on my horse, I want a thoroughbred tree on my horse. Well, there isn't a thoroughbred tree. Okay, so you can't put the thoroughbred tree on the horse. And then they don't understand that because they don't really understand that there's only a very limited amount of trees. And so what you're basically talking about is, based on the way the horse is built and so forth, you think that's probably going to fit the horse the best. We'll start there. The same thing if you have a horse that's extremely wide and big who isn't a draft horse. And so you would say, oh, let's put the draft tree on that horse and see how that fits. Well, then the person is upset because they don't have a draft horse. So you'd have to spend all this time trying to explain that it has nothing really to do with the name. We're trying to just get something because we know what the angles are, what the gullet widths are, all this. We're trying to get something we think is going to work on the horse to start with, and then we'll go from there to figure out where we need to be. But that's what's available. And so people, you would continue to have almost these arguments with people trying to help them with saddle fitting. So what part of the manufacturers did is say, hey, we're going to eliminate this problem. We're just going to call a semi-quarter horse a medium or a regular. And we're going to call a wide, okay, a full quarter horse a wide. And then we're going to call either our draft / extra wide. And when we talk, we only have to talk like that. So it doesn't make any difference what the breed is. We don't run into a lot of confusion, making the people confused, because you can imagine any of y'all, if you show up and somebody, you know nothing about it, and that you know what kind of horse you have, and somebody's telling you, oh, we're going to put a draft on your saddle on your horse isn't a draft, and the saddle's $1,500, and you're thinking, God, they're trying to take advantage of me. What am I mean, so the person's starting to get very confused. They're wondering what you're doing and so forth. So it can become, number one, the person can be very confused about it. And then, of course, they're like, well, I don't know what you're doing, so I'm going to leave. Okay, and so now you're trying to help them. They're more confused. Then they go to somebody else, and this begins this vicious circle, and then they really don't know what's going on. And so what the whole idea is just to try to fit the horse. We're just trying to figure out what's going to be the best fit for your horse and eliminate any pressure points and get that weight distributed as equally as we possibly can, okay, across your horse's back. And the reason that I like to go through, and we were talking about it, with live horses, is you get to see all the little conformation things that you can sort of look at with your eyes, and then figure out what's going to work, what's not going to work on a certain horse. Obviously, in these kind of settings, we can't really get into that. But anytime you look at your horse from behind, you're pretty much going to get a pretty good idea of how things look on your horse. And then when you set your saddle on, if you're trying a new saddle, somebody's got a used saddle, you're trying to see how that's going to work on your horse. Always put it on, sort of see, feel around it, feel underneath here. I mean, typically, if you put this saddle on and we come across here, and I run my hand, you can see how the saddle's not even moving hardly. So this really has a bridge for this. If this was a horse, this has a bridge from about here to about there. So we would actually, even though I have this pad on here, okay, which actually I took the fillers out, so we'd have to fill that in. I might even need more than that, okay, in here, just depending. But again, anytime, you would put your hand in these spots, and that's basically what we're doing. We're trying to fill. Like, see, I have contact all through here, because if I do that on this saddle moves up, I have contact, of course, in the front on either side, okay, but I don't have any contact here. And so that's what you want to look at when you've got your saddle on your horse. You just set it on. You don't have to cinch it up in the beginning. You just sort of feel. Then you've got to tighten the cinch up, because it's sort of amazing how the pad and the saddle sort of come together once you start to cinch it a little bit. What sometimes has a little bit of a void slash bridge, all of a sudden now becomes a very small area once you cinch your saddle up a little bit. So it's not always what you first think it is, okay, when you first feel. So you need to go through the whole process. And then the next thing is, of course, get on and ride. So if you're trying another someone's saddle, new saddle, used saddle, you're trying to see if it's going to work, that's what you want to do. You want to get on, you want to go for a ride, you want to build up a sweat pattern, and you want to see what it looks like. Now, obviously, you want as even a sweat pattern as you possibly can have. You also want to look for, people talk about, well, I have a dry spot. You always want to check, number one, the issue with dry spots is if you haven't had the horse for a really long time, and you really don't know what's happened to the horse, what saddle's been on and how it's been fit, so forth, over time, you could have a horse that already had this issue from way back when. And it's never going to, you're always going to have a little dry spot. The key is you've got to make sure your saddle fits correctly and don't worry about it continues to dry spot, because once those sweat glands get paralyzed, very seldom do they come back and sweat again, okay? So you may have a circle like this, you might have a circle like that. And it could have been a long time. Same thing with white hairs. People, their horses they'll have a couple of white spot, hairs coming through, and then they're, oh my gosh, my saddle might not be fitting correctly. Unless, if you haven't owned this horse for your many years, this could be an injury. The same thing I just discussed just a few minutes ago that happened way back when with the misfitting saddle, something like that. And so now it's not really what's going on for you. Okay, it's not an issue. It's showing itself from back then. And so you don't always want to get really excited when you sort of see some of these things. Sometimes people, if they see it, say, oh my gosh, am I hurting my horse? What's going on? So don't let yourself sort of run that gambit till you start checking and seeing how your saddle's fitting and make sure you've got these contacts, because that's not always the issue. I would say that basically a lot of this on horses that are, in the 8, 9, 10-year-old, if this pops up, is something that happened well before then, okay? The other thing you want to look for is when you do have, is depending on what kind of saddle pad you have, because if you've got like a wool pad, a steam press wool pad, or a 60% wool pad on your horse, they absorb a lot of perspiration. A steam press wool pad that's like 80, 90% wool will absorb 30 times its weight in moisture, okay? So it's going to suck a lot of moisture off your horse, okay? And what that does is create airflow. Well, in the process, your horse might be more wet here, and it might be not quite as wet right in here, and then it's really wet back here again when you pull that pad off, okay? What you want to do is, if you see that, is you want to quickly put your hand right then on the horse and see, is that moist? If the skin's moist, it can be drier looking because that pad has been sucking a lot of moisture off of your horse, okay? So it's not necessarily a dry spot, it's just not as much, not wet, as much wet as it is as the other two places. So you want to feel that to say, oh, that's not really just, I can tell it looks lighter, but it's not, it's still moist. All that's happening there is I've got just a touch more contact there, okay? Because if your saddle pad is way down here and it's really wet here, well, you don't have any tree down here. Your tree's up here, okay? So this has nothing to do with the saddle fitting your horse either way, well, good, poorly, what have you. It's just, this has been making contact. Your horse has got this sweating a little bit more here, and typically there's not as much pressure on here, so you're going to get more sweat because the pad isn't making contact, so it's not sucking the moisture off. Then if you have a neoprene type pad, then basically you should have a lot of perspiration because they don't absorb, a lot of them have waffle holes in them so they get airflow, but they don't absorb and pull away the perspiration. The perspiration runs off of the horse's sides. So you want to look at those type of things when you're checking to make sure, well, I'm concerned about this. I had a horse the other day. I was at a fitting in Florida, and the lady had bought the horse in Minnesota, had the horse shipped down. She had owned the horse for over a year, and she told me that she was going to bring the horse. She called me in advance and was telling me she had these white spots, and it was the weirdest thing. And she thought her saddle really wasn't fitting well, and she didn't know, the horse didn't seem to have any issues with it, but she thought it was starting to get serious because he was getting these white hairs everywhere. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And what can happen is your horse's hair can turn white because of heat, okay? There's areas where the horse gets extremely hot, okay, for a period of time, over and over. A lot of times you'll get little white hairs in those sort of areas. It doesn't mean it's happening, it just means the horse has got really warm. And again, depending on where they're from, okay, and then what climate they're at or how much they're being rode, and if it's really hot and so forth, all this plays part of it. This particular horse, when she brought the horse to me, the horse had a little white line from here to here, The horse had a white line right where the fender went on the edge, okay, and had a little white line right here at the skirt. No place where the tree was making contact, okay? And it had the same spot over here on the fender, the back rear part of the fender on the other side. I mean, when you put this up, she brought the horse out, she was showing me all these spots. And I was like, this is really sort of strange. And I thought, well, your tree isn't even making any contact in any of these places. It doesn't make any sense, you know. So we cinched the horse up. I mean, put the saddle on, looked at it. And I mean, it was exactly, I had told her, I said, you put your saddle on just like you saddle all the time. When she did it, everything lined up exactly where those spots, where those little white hairs were. I mean, it was a pretty, it looked like you'd taken a magic marker and actually drawn them on there. That's how precise they were, okay? So I said to her, I said, well, what have you been doing? Did you put anything on your horse? You're spraying some kind of bug, fly sprays, or a certain one you're using? Maybe your horse is allergic to it. She was telling me all this stuff. She said, no. I said, well, where did you buy your horse from? And she said, oh, I bought my horse from Minnesota. And I said, oh. I said, so how long have you had your horse? She said, oh, I've only had him down here for a year. Well, of course, the climate change from Minnesota to June in Florida, okay, is pretty different, okay? And so basically what was happening is where her leg was making contact, and she rides 5-6 hours straight. They don't get off, they ride. And that was basically creating heat in these little spots, and of course it was turning her horse's hair white. And so she was just thought that there was something wrong with her saddle. And I said, well, there can't be anything wrong with your saddle because it has nothing to do with where your tree is. It's all where your fenders are at, where your skirt's setting, and so forth. So that's the kind of thing that can happen where you end up with these little white hairs and you're wondering what's going on, okay? And again, it could be just heat related from sometime earlier or sometime recently when you're doing it. So I always tell people, don't get really upset that you may be doing something to your horse when you see some of these things, because it isn't the kiss of death right off the bat because you see them, okay? It's like, oh my gosh, I gotta go buy a new saddle, I can't ride, I can't this. Don't think that. You need to check and go through everything and see if your saddle's making good contact, what's going on, what does your saddle look like on your horse, okay? Is it looking this way, is it looking that way? Is everything well on it, too tight? All those kind of things. Check your pad. Also check and see if your saddle pad has bottomed out or not. So if you take a saddle pad, typically most of these saddle pads like this, basically, rule of thumb, will, before they begin to wear out, it's typically about 200 to towards 275 hours of riding, okay? And I mean riding, not just being saddled up. But what happens is, you can see when I had the tree on here, the tree is in this area. So what you want to do is fill back in here and see, is my pad still thick here? Has it bottomed out? Those are the other things you want to look at when you're checking to see what's going on with your saddle. Because if your saddle pad is bottomed out, now you don't have that protection and that shock absorption in here any longer, okay? So now, instead of it being 3/4 of an inch, it may be down to 1/4 of an inch, okay? The front of it's always going to feel nice because there isn't anything up here. So, we were laughing earlier. I said, yeah, for years, I used to always feel my pads and go, boy, my pad's in really good shape. Well, I was feeling the part that never gets used. So it was like, yeah, of course it feels good. It's but nothing's on here, okay? So you have to get back in here and then feel what's going on in here. The rest of this pad may look just wonderful, okay? However, this area where the tree is at could be bottomed out. And that could also be an issue that you're having because now you need a new pad because your pad's not offering your horse any protection, okay, underneath there. So what I like to do is, anybody has questions, something that I went over that didn't make any sense, which a lot of times that happens when I talk. So anything like that, I'll be glad to go over it or talk about it, or anything about certain saddles, or if you've got an issue with your own saddle or something that you would like to talk about or try to find something out.
I'm late.
Lady in the pink.
I'm sorry, I'm late. How do you clean your saddle pads? I don't know if you went over that.
Oh, well, basically it depends on the pad. If it's a wool-based pad, okay, like this pad here is like 60% wool, okay? So if it's a steam press, they're basically 80, 90%. What you typically would do is turn this over, take a little sprayer, hand sprayer, put some water in it, lightly mist it across it, and then take woolite foam, and then just rub that on real lightly with your hand.
Okay.
Then let it set just for a little while, 10 minutes. Don't let it dry, keep it moist, and then just go back, hang it up, and then spray it off. Start at the top, and then you're gonna have to let it dry. but you don't want to like soak it when you try to spray it. You want to set it up sort of an angle so that you can knock that off, because what you're trying to do is just get any of that bacteria and that stuff. Now you can also take, you know that new, it's really got a saw blade in it, that little shedder they have out. It comes, I forget there's a name for it.
We have, they're like the slick and easies, but not, it's the sleek
exactly.
and easy. Or the
you can
easy
take
group.
that and just in between every time you ride is once the hair dries on these pads, on a wool pad, you can take that and go, because typically you get it like right in here, okay, and you'll get some up here. You can just go through and use that, and that'll just pull that hair loose and pull it off as well.
Because I know that the wool pads, they get a lot of sweat
Mm-hmm. Yep.
in them, and it's, you know, you want to kind of draw that out of them.
Yep.
I don't know if you can wet them and then maybe shot back some of that out.
Oh, some
I'm
people,
not saying like soak them.
yeah, some people will do that. I've had people that have done that because I mean it'll draw a lot of that. It'll dry faster.
Yeah.
So if you're in a climate that's not really that hot and you don't have an area to put it out, where really the sun can hit it and sort of dry it, because once you clean them, those pads absorb. Like I said, they can absorb up to 30 times their weight. So if you're not careful, you're going to have a lot of water in your pads. So you got to let it dry. So you want to be able to pull it out. But a lot of people will take a shot back. I've seen them do that. They'll wet it, and then they'll just go over and suck as much as they can out of it, I should say, and then hang it up and let it dry like that. But and you don't have to do that often. I mean, typically if you do that clean them a wool pad really about every 3 months. Okay, and a lot of it depends on how much you ride. So I'm talking 3 months if you ride, like 3 times a week or something.
I'm
like
always
that.
thinking spring cleaning.
Yeah. So if you're only riding, once a week, I mean, you can do 6 months or whatever. A lot of times people will try to do that at the end of the season while it's still warm enough. They'll clean those pads so that they're ready to use, when spring comes the next year, because it's typically not warm enough in a lot of climates for the pad to dry out fast enough. So that kills all that bacteria, and it's made for wool. So your woolite is made for wool, so you're not putting some kind of soap or something on there that's going to dry it out or change the texture of it. But don't take something rough and go in circles and all this, because you'll start separating. That wool starts off like 3 feet of wool, and they keep steaming it, pressing it all the way down. This one here starts at about 2 feet. They do the same thing. So if you get to the back and you start taking something and circling all that, you're going to end up actually breaking down the fiber and actually can even get a hole into it like that. So, any other questions?
I have
Yes.
an older horse who's lost a lot of top line in the last year. My saddle is wide. It was made to fit him 10 years ago. Now he's getting sore right on the point of his wither, and just right, he gets some edema like right along his wither. So I don't know how high to get it up.
Well, what's probably happened with, again, I'm just doing generalities because I can't see the horse and the saddle and so forth. But based on what my view would be, is the saddle's probably dropped a little bit, okay, down from where it was. And so what you want to do is basically lift it up. I mean, you're talking literally 3/4 of an inch or something. You need to get it up. So you either need to get a pad that's either thicker and built through that area, or something's got a lift on it. It'll fill that whole top. There's a pad that Reinsman makes, which is number 442, which is a really good pad to fill a lot of that, because it tapers itself. It starts regular, then it gets a little wider gradually, and then goes back, so it'll fill a lot of those voids in all the way across that area like that. But that's probably what's happened. It's probably just dropped because, and what you're getting is you're getting a little bit too much pressure, okay, right in that particular spot, like that. So that I would do that. Either take an older pad that I have, or something, cut something out, so put on there and lift it up and sort of see what it looks like. Cinch it up and see if that doesn't, if that doesn't correct what your issue is. Then you can decide if you want a thicker pad or whatever you want to do. But you can, take towels. You can take towels and lay across there, like a hand towel. You can follow the hand towel and lay it across there as a temporary fix to see if that's what the issue is, and it'll lift it up. And then with the hand towel, you can fold it till you get the thickness that you sort of want, on there.
Talk about the flex tree, and what do you think of the treeless saddles?
Well, the treeless, I'll answer your last question first. The treeless saddle is one of those things they either love them or hate them, okay? I mean, and there's several, quote, versions of treeless, okay, that are out there. Circle Y makes a saddle along with Bob Marshall. They actually used to build the Bob Marshall, so it's a very similar product, okay, but they built Bob Marshall saddles for years and years and years for him. But what you have is on those saddles, what they've done is they basically have put like polyfoam and so forth, and they've created this over-exaggerated pad, okay? So that you actually have a much thicker cushioning than you do in a regular skirt on a saddle. And then, of course, they created the seats by either having really deep seats, like in the barrel racing world. You got like Tammy Fisher is a really strong proponent of the treeless saddle, and you sit really deep. They're really comfortable. I mean, they sit like you're sitting in a lazy boy. Actually, I mean, they're pretty comfortable just to sit in. However, the thing that always bothers me, because it's almost like a bareback pad in a system. I mean, what they've done is they create a channel through there to sort of elevate it up so it's not sitting down like a regular bareback pad does. So they've created a channel to lift all that up with the padding and all. It's one of those things I don't particularly myself. It's almost one of those weight things, okay, and it's how someone rides, okay, because if somebody rides really dead, sits down in the saddle and just sits there, and you get into this point where you're talking like, 200 pounds and up, I'm not a big fan of anything, bareback pad, whatever, for somebody to actually ride in that, because there's really not, I mean, once that begins to break in and sits down, you're basically right, you can go right to the horse's spine. You put too much pressure. So I'm not, I'm not a big fan when you get into that area. The other part is if you like them, I mean, like I said, they're very comfortable to ride in. The issues with them, as far as either what side you're on, is you're extremely close contact. So you either, if you have a horse that's very sensitive, any motion you make, the horse feels it. So now you have a horse going right, left, right, forward, back, and that's one of the things. And then if you love that, okay, then you've got a great fit, because now it's basically you're just as close to the horse as you possibly can get. And they do make a saddle pad that has a nylon bar across it. Will help lift that up on there. So they do make that for people. Okay, so if they're a little bit heavier, that they can still use it if that's what they like, and so forth. But it depends on what you personally like. Like I said, most everybody I know, they ride in one, they either love it to death or they hate it. There's like no in between. It's one of the two. The flex trees are, again, flex is a term, so there are several types of flex trees. Circle Y makes their tree is proprietary, and it's a fiberglass composite swell and cantle, and then the bar is low density nylon with a high density top line bar, and what the high density does is it keeps the saddle from flexing down. Okay, and the flex for that basically will move about 1/4 of an inch all over. What the good part about it is it's sort of self-conforming. If you're looking for a trail saddle or a barrel saddle, it works for that. Other than that, you can't do anything. I mean, you can't drag with them or whatever because they're composites and they don't have the durability. They're very lightweight compared to rigid wood trees. If you go in the barrel racing world, you probably out of the top 50 in the world, you probably have half of those people in some kind of a flex combo tree. The barrel racers really like them because the trees will go in the shoulder and moves out right, left as they go into it, so they have a little bit of give to them. And so if you've got a horse that's got some minor issues, we're talking about a little bit, more of a dip, the saddle will drop a little bit, so it sort of will conform down if it's only minor, so you can put a regular pad on, and that saddle will sometimes fill that void, so you don't have to end up, using more pad, like that. But it's not a cure-all. I mean, you're not going to be able to buy one flex saddle and it fit every horse you ever have. I mean, they come in widths just the same, the same thing, the regular width, the wide, and the extra wide, because you still have to have the spread as far as in your bar angles and so forth to still fit to the horse. They will give a little. But what's good about them is that if you're on the borderline, you can maybe use without having to you already have one. Your horse gains a little bit of weight, a little bit of muscle. You've had him in the regular tree. Because you're on the borderline now, it has enough give to it that you don't have to move to another saddle. You can maybe, if you're already in a 3/4 inch pad, you might be able to drop down to a 1/2 inch pad, and then because of that, you still have a saddle that fits, and you tweaked it and you're ready to go like that. But I mean, they're extremely popular. I think, you've got different versions. You have people that do them with rubber trees. I mean, rubber bars actually. Okay, so the bars are actually rubber. Circle Y tried a couple versions of those when they were first working on their tree, and the problem they didn't like with that is it got too soft quickly, and then of course your screws that hold everything together would start to come loose and so forth, so they didn't go any further with that. And they had Texas A&M University drill team help develop. They were the ones who rode in these flex trees for the first basic, give or take, year, testing and find out what was working and what wasn't working on it. And that's where they found out some of these other options that were out there. They just didn't like the long-term durability of them. But the flex tree, the Circle Y does, has been out now for, gosh, it's almost 30 years now. And each year, there's more sold than the previous year, you know, that are out there, yeah. So it's for basically trail riding, you know, trail racing. It does an extremely good job once you get, you know, again, it's not going to be anything. And I mean, you can do other things in it, you know. I mean, Julie Goodnight has a version that she has out that again is a trail saddle, but also a Western dressage, you know, saddle that she rides. So there's other things you can do. You just can't do anything where you're going to pull or drag anything with them like that. So.
I have an old horse and he's really sunken in the withers, and I ride a tucker, and I've rode in several different pads, and I have several that I change out periodically, but for the point of the shoulder, if I put the saddle behind that shoulder, where is what it should be, I guess, it seems like it's way far back. Do I need to build that all up? Do I need?
Well, if the dip's pretty big, I mean, as a rule,
He's
I mean,
pretty dippy.
if we take,
I mean-
you see that?
But yet, he's not dipped enough to where he's, I mean, I can put my hand between the top. I mean, he's got plenty of
Well, you can
space
see how this
behind.
is sort of, this is sort of a high
Yeah,
weathered,
and
narrow body.
he's
stuff
wide
like this.
withered like that.
So what you have is, I mean, number one, in a Western saddle versus English, and if your shoulder is like up here, I mean, number one, what's going to happen is the skirt of the saddle, because the skirt further in front of the tree,
Yeah.
is going to fit basically about a quarter up on that area, okay? Because the shoulder in a Western is going to move slightly underneath the skirt of a Western saddle, where an English saddle you're going to be back.
Right.
Because your English saddle tree is only about yay long,
Right.
and you can flock it, you can do all sorts
Yeah.
of things to that which you can't do to a Western. Plus what you're doing is trying to distribute more weight, because the wider your bars are as far as the surface contact, the better it is, okay, across your
Yeah.
horse's back. So it's going to actually be up just a little bit more, so if the shoulder would probably be running, you know, from an angle, going this way, would be a little bit underneath, under here. So this would
Okay.
be slightly, okay, a little forward, okay?
It seems like when I tighten him up, it really pulls in, and my saddle wants to work back.
Backwards.
Yeah.
So
all
what
the
I would do
time.
is look and see, if you've got these two areas here, then you need to get something to fill these two areas, okay, right on the side to try. What's happening probably, again, I'm not
Yeah.
seeing the horse, but typically what's probably happening is you end up, and this is real common, you end up with these areas here, okay?
There's
as
a
the gap,
hole.
Right.
I mean-
And so as the horse moves,
Typically.
okay, so if you put the saddle up here, as the horse moves, every time he moves, he's pushing the
Pushes it
saddle back
back.
to the lowest spot because it's gravity. The saddle's going to go
Okay.
to the lowest point. So what you want to do is to fill this up so that all this is level, and I don't mean out or whatever, but you're just trying to get the same angle so that once the horse moves, he's not going to drive this back, because what happens once he does the first few steps, he goes there, and then
Yeah.
the next one's there, and now he really gets to push it because now it's sort of back behind the shoulder.
And when you go up a hill, you lose it all. I mean,
Right.
you know, it's.
Exactly. So
and
I
then
would
you go
look at
down.
doing that. I would look at getting a filler to fill these two spots.
What do you think about the built-up pads?
Well,
I've owned a few of them too,
as long as you need to, the deal
because
there.
they're about like
They
this.
come back there. You just want to make sure on those that once, I mean, when they drop off, you know, they're here.
They drop off big
They drop
time.
off a lot. So what you have to do is you sort of want to test one, you know, where you put a sheet under it or whatever, and you put it on there, you know, if you don't have one and you're getting a
Yeah.
new one, to make sure it's going to work, because you don't want that to create another issue back here.
See, and I've
So-
had that where the pad, and sometimes the pad creates an issue because those tuckers ride low,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so I've had pads that if they're not long enough, you know, that rubs because you have to keep that above that skirt. And I've had them where they rub at the bottom of that skirt because it's, you know, it's so tight right there.
Yeah, it's got a dropped rigging.
Yeah,
so forth.
because they drop.
This
yeah,
pad
the
that
rigging's dropped.
this pad here is available in the dropped rigging square. It actually dropped down here, and then this is cut off up here, so it'll fit like the shorter tucker pads. And this is dropped down about almost 3 inches.
I have a square skirt on mine, but
Yeah. And so, well, it'll fit to the square tucker because
Yeah.
the length of it's still the
Is-
same. They just cut this corner off,
Right.
so it'll still fit up here.
Yeah.
But, you know, I would try to see if that would work. What I would first do at home is I would again take a hand towel,
Mm-hmm.
and I would fold that hand towel over, and I would sort of look, you know, from the front and the back and sort of see when I have the thickness without anything on it, just
Mm-hmm.
the horse and your hand towel on top of it. And sort of see the thickness. It would sort of level that out. So if this is my shoulder, you know, like this, and the gap's way back here,
Mm-hmm.
then I would fill I would roll that,
Fill it in.
okay, till I had it thick enough, and it has to be about, this wide, once you get somewhere in that deal. And then put it behind it, so it's okay, well, that's pretty close, because you're gonna have a pad that's gonna fill, so you don't want it to be exactly even. Then I would put my pad on, I would lay that across there, then I'd saddle my horse, and then I'd go for a ride and see what happens, okay?
Because see, I mean, I've had the saddle and the horse a very long time. So, and it's getting worse with his age because he too has lost top line a few years back. I've had a hard time getting weight on him out here. But, and he was always a real heavy horse. So he's changed a lot in 18 years. So it's been a challenge to get the saddle to fit right. And I'm heavy and it pulls it back, when you're trail riding. And
Yeah, I would try that
it
and
don't
see if
feel
you
good
can't
to even ride.
Oh yeah, because what happens is, see what begins to happen is you're sort of end up with that same little dip, is once it gets far enough back, you start off like
then
that.
I'm fitting forward.
Yeah, so what happens is you go there,
Yeah,
and then you
yeah.
end up like that.
Yeah.
And so now your weight, your
Yeah.
feet are up, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
all
not
this. And of course,
comfortable
this
at
is
all.
all, now you can see how this is back behind the
Yeah.
shoulder even more, so it makes it worse. So you want to fill that, and I would try the towel thing.
Okay.
If you've got, again, you can take a towel, you can take an old saddle pad that you don't use, you can cut the back of it where, where there's still, you've got some padding. You can even do that and just lay it across there, get you a, a little strap sewn onto it to see if that will sort of, fill that. But I would test it like that, just get it like that and then go out and ride and see if that is helping. Because if you just get a little bit, if it's a little better, once you get actual pad that's really got consistency thicker, then it's going to be even better than that, okay, than it is with the hand towel.
Okay. I had purchased a few years ago, I actually bought it for the seat, but it's a gel insert that goes into some expensive saddle pad, but I bought it for the seat to sit on. I think my girlfriend bought the pad, but they're actually gel inserts that go on some pad, but they're pretty thick, but they're a cooling gel. I don't know what company it was, I can't remember, but they were down at the horse fair a few years back. But do you have saddle pads that those gel inserts go into as well?
Well, you could probably, depending on the thickness, it might fit into the pocket that's in any of these.
These
So you
things
could
are
try
like
them
this
that.
big. They're pretty good
Right.
size.
Well, you can check, I mean, it depends too if it's liquid gel, if it's solid. If the solid gel, like nitro gel, then it would, I mean, you could cut it to make it work because it won't leak if it's a solid. Now, if it's,
Right, I don't think it would leak. I think
Yeah.
you can cut the stuff.
Yeah, if it's a solid, you can do it. If it's in like a bladder,
Yeah,
like in case you
yeah.
don't want to cut that because it'll leak out on that. But if it's just a solid,
I'll
looks
have
like a
to
piece
call
of
her and
foam.
see what brand that was, because I know she bought the darn pad.
Yeah, so you
And-
can do that because you could cut that, and then do the same thing, fill it in here, or
Yeah.
attach it to something
Yeah.
else to fill across there and see if that will fill
Yeah.
your little void up. Like
Because
that.
it really feels good. I mean, it's a nice feel.
So I would try that. Like I said, I try it with the
Okay.
with the hand towel.
Okay.
Fill that in and see. Like I said, if it's 50% better, okay, for
Right.
a limited time, then once you
Well,
get another pad, it's going to be like 100%.
Right, and
better.
he's 18, so it's not like I ride him, I just ride the other horse, which is a year or two younger.
See?
But she's built totally different. And so, like everybody else, I have one saddle I like to ride in because I can't lift the other one, so.
Any other questions?
I have a related question.
I have one.
What do they
We
do
all have
to
those
trees to make forward heights?
What they do is they block them with little. They can change the position. See this little black thing here? You can move these to change the position of where you hang that.
Now, are those all saddles?
Typically, you'll notice this has got a little drop to it, so your
Correct.
stirrup leather wraps around here. Then they can put blocks in different spots to keep them from
No,
moving
you
to
say
different
blocks,
deal.
like those little plastic
Yeah, they can
things?
do a little deal. Like sometimes they'll do leather. Just depends on who the manufacturer is, of the saddle company, because they're the ones who put them on here. This is all added after. It doesn't come with the tree. They put all this on there. Depending on where they want the stirrups to hang, what they want them to do. They either have them or don't have them, one of the two, and then they put them in the different positions.
So then you could get a saddle change from stirrups that weren't kind of like,
You might be able to. It depends on the saddle. Somebody would have to pull that off, take your seat jockey, and sort of see if it was either built into the actual tree. Sometimes they have a tree that actually only has one slot only, and it actually drops into that slot, and it really has almost no. Maybe it might move like 1/4 of an inch max, and so that may be the only place that your stirrup leathers are going to hang. They're not going to move. So. But it may have like the block or the leather strap or whatever, sort of a harness type thing in there built in to keep it from going certain places. So that when they pull that up, they can look and see what it's like.
did you take that out?
Yeah.
Do gated trees have their stirrups fitting more forward?
Yes.
It seems like everybody I see, they're falling off their horse on the back.
As a rule, they are
Why
moved a
do
little
they?
bit more forward, and of course, some people that do ride gated horses sort of over accentuate that.
Yeah, it's like they're
So they get a
falling
little
off,
bit-
and
yeah,
I
they get a little
thought,
bit,
why don't
sometimes
they
too
stand
far
up?
back, because people keep saying, you get your foot lean back, get a hold of, and get with the deal, and of course, what
Yeah.
happens, it's sort of one of those deals, I do a little bit, and then I do a little bit more, then I do a little bit more before long, instead I was supposed to be like this, and now I'm back here.
Yeah, and
like
that,
so.
I've seen that, and, because I'm looking for a gated kind of, that will be my next horse because of my back. But I don't know if I'm gonna be able to ride with my old saddle on it, because and I pull my feet, I like my feet forward. I push, and I like the tucker because of that, they're pretty flexible.
Yeah.
But I'm always pulling my stirrups forward when I ride, but that's just the way I ride. But
Yeah, and you
I don't
and
know
you
that
have,
I could.
and typically in the trail end of it, you have a little bit more motion to the front. It's typically
Right.
you don't have as much motion to the back as
Right.
a rule, okay?
Well, and
so
there,
forth, so.
my tucker is old school, and its leathers are real soft. The newer ones are heavier leathered than mine, and mine are real flexible, although they're not, I don't have the cutbacks like these. Mine's a western cut, but I still like them because they're very flexible on the stirrups and these.
Yeah, I wouldn't think you should have an issue, keeping your feet far enough forward.
I don't,
Because
on
it has,
mine.
it has, with a gated horse, some people, like I said, just some people either are more comfortable riding that way, and so they really over-exaggerate that. Some people just get in the habit of doing that.
So if I was to find a gated that has a regular, that looks like a quarter, I don't want a little skinny horse, so my saddle should fit fine then.
More than likely, yeah.
Okay.
You might need to tweak
Because
your
I would hate to
pad.
have to buy both.
Yeah, you might have to tweak your pad a little bit.
Right.
And, either thicker or thinner, or whatever
Right.
the case may be, but as a rule, yes, because
It
they've
should.
incorporated that angle with the bar flare and so forth, and
Mhm.
the tuckers as a crossover between the quarter,
And the
okay,
gate.
and so forth with the gated. They've sort of
Yeah.
incorporated that. And then for horses that are more traditional slab sided and so forth, they went back to that B tree, so that
Yeah,
fits.
and that's that straight,
Mhm. Yeah,
those
really
little
straight little-
those
uh-huh.
little straight
Yeah.
sided horses, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes those saddles even fit like thoroughbreds. I put them on
Right.
thoroughbreds before they were built like that. They're just bigger, but they're taller, but it fits the same way, so, because they have a similar, again,
Well, like the Paspinos, they're real
Mhm.
flat
Right,
sided.
exactly.
There's
Same type of
those
thing.
little things, yeah. I can't ride.
Anything?
I do. I kind of have a general question that you probably already answered, but I have a fairly high withered mare that I originally bought a Reinsman with the cutback with the buildups on it. That was the fleece line,
Yeah.
and it fit her very well. She had very even sweat pattern with it, no dry spots, no pressure points. But the saddle was constantly slipping when you were mounting or dismounting. So I switched over to the Reinsman with the neoprene with the waffling on it, and it's the curve, the contoured pad,
Yep.
and it says to lift the pad up a little bit to give the wither clearance. So noticed with her now, she's starting to get a dry line along her spine with it. No tenderness, and when you take the saddle off, the heat's pretty consistent everywhere. I'm just concerned that would be an issue.
I have the same pad, I bet, but that's what I have on mine. But when I lift the pad up here, the air goes down, and of course my tucker's hollow in the middle. And so I think, I don't know, that I'm getting an airflow all the way down the middle.
That's what I was
wondering.
Because mine, that's what I think, because my spine will be dry too.
Yeah, that's why
Yeah, that's what it is. It's just you're getting airflow through there, and
Yeah.
there's nothing really making contact, so the air is able to move through, and you don't get any sweat in there.
That when you said that, and I thought, well, that's what I ride too, and that's what I have.
Yeah, that's
But-
why I
Yeah, as long as you wedge it up in the gullet and it
Yeah.
stays up in here,
Yeah.
then you're
Right.
gonna have that, and then, like I said, if you've got a saddle that has a tunnel relief type system in it,
Yeah.
it's gonna elevate it up, and so your bars are on the side, there's nothing through the deal, so the air's gonna move through the center part. So your little spine will actually be dry, it'll be just like a dry swat.
Yeah, that's why I was, and then when I saw that, I panicked.
Mine does the same
Yeah,
thing.
typically if your saddle, it really is pressing on your horse's back, okay? for anyone, you're typically going to know it. Your horse is going to start to do something, okay? You're going to get off. And so I always tell people all the time when you, this is something I learned from a old-time trainer out in Texas. He did on every horse. And what you want to do is either take your finger, take something that's round like a magic marker, you know, that's a big magic marker. And always when you get off of your horse and you're unsaddling, is just put your magic marker and just lightly, don't press hard, okay, don't like you're digging, but just enough to where there's pressure and run down. Now if your horse does a little fly, you know, don't worry, that doesn't mean anything. That just means like a fly was on him and they're doing that. What you want to do is when you move this down, does the horse drop? Does the horse move away from you or something like that? If you just run it on both sides, so this is your spine and you run it down here, you run it down here, and the horse doesn't do anything, then basically you don't have any issues. You know, if you run it back here and all of a sudden you get to here and all of a sudden the horse drops on one side and then you do on the other side drop, then typically you got some soreness here. Now again, if it's a mare, it might have nothing to do with the saddle. It could be ovaries, it could be worse, could be kidneys on any horse. So those are other things you can look at. But that typically is going to tell you if you've got some problem. I do that every time I get off my horse. I check the back every time to see if there's any. I always look to see what the sweat pattern is, and I just do that to make sure nothing's happening just as a habit. It doesn't, I mean, it's not that I'm concerned my saddle doesn't fit, but as your horse changes, you don't really know what's going on and so forth. So I always do that just as a precautionary measure, because if there is something happening, I want to know about it then, not, you know, 4 or 5 rides later when the horse is really crippled like that. So, any other questions?
Just real quick, I have the opposite of what they said. I have a pretty wide guy, so I always worry about pinching. And you had mentioned about feeling up in there. Could you do a really quickie again, how to feel up in there to
yeah, what you
tell
want
if
to
it's
do is
pinching or not?
I'm going to sit there. When you're looking at your saddle, I'll turn this around a little bit that way too, so it'll sort of help a little bit. But so if this was the horse, okay, and again we don't have a pad on here, so if I put this on and I ran my hand, you can see basically I can have about 1 finger, a little more than 1 finger width on here, which would typically be okay, because once I put a saddle pad on here, I'm going to have more clearance, okay? Even though the pad is going to take up some of the space, I still have more clearance, okay, under there, because now I've elevated the saddle up, okay? But when I put my hand on here, we're going to move this back. What I want to do is, you can see how my hand amount, let me move this way, it might be better. You can see how my fingers, you see when I put my hand in here, how this is moving, okay? This is snug, but I have to sort of force my hand in there, okay? It's not just going to slide like it's got grease on it back and forth. So the saddle has got to fit relatively snug on your horse or it'll come off, okay? And then of course once you get on the horse, it's going to be a little tighter because now you have the weight compressing down, okay? So you want to be able to fit in this, but if you'll see how this looks as an example, you see how this is sort of open? You see how this is open in here and you can see a little bit of fleece and so forth in here? If this saddle was like that, okay, and you see, I can't do anything here, okay? You can barely see, this is really digging in and so forth, and I can't get any fingers in here. That typically is that this saddle is either, number one, the skirt's either tilted in, okay, and you want to look at your skirt, because you could have a used saddle or an older saddle where the skirts are tilted inward. It has nothing to do with the tree, it's the skirt that's doing it. But if this would be like this, all my contact is right in here, really tight, and I can't do anything whatsoever, okay, as far as getting my hand in it. That would be a saddle that I would typically say is, number one, probably, more than likely, if it's all at the top, it's going to be too wide, which means you need a thicker pad and you need to get this saddle up like this so that you can see in here, and you see that this is open and there's some movement in here with your hand. Then if the saddle's perched way up like this, and this is all making contact here, but it's way high like this after you cinch it, then you want to check, because if you have way too much room in here, okay, then you check the bottom this way, okay, from the side, and it's tight down here and it's really open up here, then basically your saddle's probably too narrow because all your contact is going to be down here. So what's happening on your tree is the contact's here to here. This is all making contact. You don't have hardly any contact at all up here. And what you want to try to get is something more like somewhere in here would be what you try to, not too much here, not too much down there, but more through the center. And so the other thing too depends a little bit on how much bar flare that you have. Some saddles are going to have a little bit more bar flare, so it's going to be a little bit more open, okay, from the beginning, but it would sit down. But that's what you're trying to look for, okay, when you're looking at your saddle. And the other thing is, this doesn't always happen. Your saddle can be too wide, but what happens is this: you draw the saddle down, and the back of the saddle comes up like this, okay, when you cinch it, because the saddle has to keep going down, down, down until it finally makes contact someplace, okay, which is going to be towards the top. And what you're looking at is how high is too high. And the idea is, you know, for the rear, does my saddle look like that when I look at it from here to here? Does it do that with it cinched to the deal? And if it's up like this means your saddle's also too wide too, okay? Because if I can stick my fist underneath here, okay, you're basically your saddle, there's an issue going on. This is way, way too high off the back. Now, you could fit a couple of fingers in here, okay? It's not an issue, okay?
And that's
because
with
if
the
you'll
saddle
notice,
pad underneath?
do what
That's
now?
checking it with the saddle pad underneath?
That's
or
with the pad on there too, because you don't want the pad down and the saddle like
Right,
this,
right,
okay?
okay.
And so what happens is if you also have to look at your saddle, because a lot of these new saddles have got, over the years, have got what they call a dovetail. And you'll notice this saddle here sort of goes, the skirt's going up a little bit, it's not going straight out the back. And what that's for, the reason they designed them that way, is for people who actually ride too far back, we were talking about the gate, who get too far back, because what they're doing is changing the weight distribution because of the way they're riding. So now they get all this weight in the back, and what used to happen, because there wasn't this clearance and this thing wasn't dovetailed out, this saddle was straight, it would dig into the horse's back. And so as they would be riding this way, with all this friction, okay, you'd end up with these sores eat into the horse's, okay, spine, okay, or two sides or whatever like that. So what happened is, Tucker first came out and did this tunnel skirt, so if you'll notice it's got this big, you see how there's a skirt on one side and a skirt on another side, and there's this gap, okay, through here, so that's called a tunnel skirt, and they connect it. So what that does is give you that elevation away from the horse's spine all the way through. So even though this is tilted, if that was sitting on your horse with a saddle pad, okay, that doesn't mean it's too wide because it's elevated. If that was your saddle pad and you had this gap, I mean, that's fine. You don't want a gap like that underneath, okay? So that would give you the because again, as you look at your saddle, when I was talking about earlier, to go through and say, okay, what does my saddle look like on my horse when I look at it? Is it this way, you know, is it that way, or is it pretty level? Okay, those are the things that you're all trying to incorporate in what good saddle fit is like. Now, again, you've got to start and say, okay, well, it sits pretty nice on my horse. Then you want to come up here and begin to feel here, run your hands through here, run your hand underneath this here, okay, and see if I have contact, because see the bottom of this bar is right in this area right here. So if I push my hand and I have to move the saddle to get my hand there, then I have contact, okay? If I could just slide my hand up there to some point and there's no contact way up here, then basically, okay, my saddle at that point is probably more than likely a little too wide. I need to then get a thicker saddle pad, you know, and or get another saddle, one of the two, okay, to fill that void.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Are you going to be local fitting horses?
Oh, I'll be back probably in about 8 weeks or so.
Where?
Actually, I don't know yet. There's a lot of discussion. I may be here. They're talking about doing something in one of the barns around here or something. So
I have some friends who want to come.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, we were talking about it a little earlier. So we haven't put anything together, but once we do, they'll post it on Facebook and so forth like that. So.
I have one more. What do you think about the rigging that comes down from the front and back cinch and meets in the middle and goes under? The cinch seems to fit more in the middle of the horse. Yeah, my girlfriend's got the Tucker that does it that way. And
oh, the EBR rigging?
You know, it rigs like this and goes under.
This is...
Do they work better than just the regular for a trail saddle? Hers is very similar to that.
Well,
actually,
as a rule,
yeah.
As a rule, the reason this was designed, of course, anything that angles this rear view that's angled that way is for an EBR rigging, which is Enduro Balanced Rigging. That's what it stands for. You don't have to use this. If you, for example, you bought this saddle, you don't have to use this back rigging if you don't want to. You can rig the saddle up here and not even go through this.
Oh,
okay?
well, but... Okay.
So that's an option. You can do either one. The reason this was designed this way is because endurance riders wanted a way to keep their saddle snug to the horse's back, and they wanted less weight, so they didn't want a rear flank, and they didn't want anything the horse could reach up when they were doing high country or rough rocky stuff, get their toe caught in it, and of course have a big wreck. Okay, and so this came about as being able to pull this, rigging this, run this over through, and then back down to your girth and tighten it, and then this pulls this down and sort of snugs it to your horse.
Like a back cinch.
Exactly, the same thing without the strap going this way, okay? So a lot of people like that because it keeps a lot of
Right.
motion away from here.
Yeah. Hers
And it's
fits.
very popular. A lot
But
of,
is it on the gated only then on the Tucker?
No, you can get them on any of them.
Oh,
It's just
okay.
an option. You can get on any.
Because her cinch seems to, I mean, I bet it fits 6 inches further back on
Yeah,
its stomach.
it turns into a center fire position.
Yeah,
Is what it
so
does.
is that better on the horse than having it stuck right
Typically,
up under?
a lot of people that ride gated horses like the center fire position, and that also helps for that too. So
Oh.
you could actually like rig this saddle.
So
If
it
we-
kind of frees up that whole shoulder
Yeah,
on it?
because you have all that
Oh.
open area in the front, because
Oh.
they have all that action, okay, to the front, okay, where you don't have that typically in the other breeds, okay. So what would happen is, if you see the, this is, oh yeah, this has got the 7/8 rigging.
Yeah,
But
it-
anyway, if this
yeah.
had the 3/4 rigging would be right here. And so you can see, it's almost the center
Yeah.
of the horse's stomach.
Yeah.
So you could actually just rig even in a 3/4. A lot of gated saddles just have a 3/4 rigging position only.
Instead of the back?
Yeah,
Oh.
and so it would sit right there. The only thing you have to do is when you rig this, you have to check this a couple of times when you're first starting to ride, because your girth is moved back, and it's sort of in the area where
Where you
the
blow
horse
up.
is getting
Yeah.
a little bigger. So, the horse is tapering towards the
Mm-hmm.
front. So it's tapering that way, and it gets bigger as he goes back. Just, I don't care if he's in shape or over,
Right.
that's just the shape of the horse, okay?